This is Radio Today broadcasting in Johannesburg on 1485 AM and nationally on DSTV audio channel 869.
Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. Welcome, welcome. It is yet another interesting conversation. It is Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini. It is fabulous to be with you. Thank you for tuning in. I'd like to start off by welcoming our syndication partners. That's 90.3 MC FM, and that's in Plet, Knysna FM, Wild Coast FM in East London, Bay FM in PE, and we have a new syndication partner, Guy FM. Welcome. Lovely to have you listening to the show. And of course, Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za. So Conversations is what we like to bring you every week. We like to discuss interesting topics with interesting people, and sometimes extraordinary events, and sometimes just the ordinary made extraordinary through the telling. And as I say, week in and week out, I love to hear from you. So last week I put it out there because I had David Bullard on the show, and David very generously donated a few of his books. Screw it, let's do lunch. So I've got some copies I'd like to give away, and I invited you to visit my website, which is Conversations with Niki, one word, and Niki spelled N-I-K-I, so it's conversationswithniki.co.za, and there's a contact me page, and you just click on the page and you put in your details and give me any feedback, or perhaps you have stories that you would like to hear on Conversations with Niki. Any ideas? As I said, I'd love to hear from you. And the first 10 people to do that will get a copy of David Bullard's book. So I'd like to congratulate Nikki Kaminer, Joss Donaldson, Lungi Mutseta, Pat Freeman, Vaneshri, no surname there, Vanna Ferreira, Alice Ferguson, and B. Mungwe. And congratulations, you got yourself a copy of that fab David Bullard book. And as I said, I will still be giving away more. So just go and visit that website. And also, incidentally, if during the interview you have to go anywhere, please don't worry. We do podcast each and every interview, and you just need to go to the website and the podcasts are there. So Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela, has obviously been on our minds. We know that he is still in hospital every single day. We think about Madiba, wishing him well. I was lucky enough to drive past his house at one stage and just park my car and walk on the pavement and look at all the pictures, and from old and young, and just to see how many young children still today. He's a beacon of light and hope, and young children drawing pictures and poetry, and it's so heartwarming to go along and to see something like that. And when I think of Nelson Mandela, I'm reminded of the time when a very special man came and visited these shores. A man who I think would be likened very much to Nelson Mandela, and who, unfortunately, there was quite a lot of controversy just a few years ago when he was going to visit yet again, and his visa was not granted, or rather it was delayed for a period of time. And of course, I'm talking about the Dalai Lama, His Holiness. And after thinking about that and walking around outside Nelson Mandela's home, and the stories around the Dalai Lama, I just thought it would be such a wonderfully interesting conversation if someone happened to be sitting in the room when His Holiness and when former President Nelson Mandela sat down and had a conversation, and asking the question, I wonder what the first few words were. I wonder what they discussed. Did they discuss the weather at first, just to break the ice? Did they discuss global issues? Did they perhaps discuss their very personal struggles that they have had to encounter, how they've overcome it, how they continue to overcome these struggles every single day? I wonder what it was that they discussed. Well, we'll never really know exactly what they discussed, but I have such an interesting guest today, because my guest actually has a very close association with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In fact, he had a dream of bringing the Dalai Lama to South Africa and getting him to meet Nelson Mandela. And so he has quite a lot of insights and he has lots of stories to share. So I think you need to go and make yourself a cup of tea or coffee or get yourself a glass of wine or whatever it is and sit back and relax and get ready for a very, very interesting conversation. I'd like to welcome Guy Lieberman onto the show. Hi, Guy.
Hi, Nikki.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Guy, you're a social activist, amongst many other things, and you're also a Tibetan supporter. You've been very outspoken during your time in your support, and you've acted as a liaison when the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, has visited South Africa. And you and I have chatted before about these experiences that you've had, these interesting conversations and these interesting stories. So I'm delighted that you've decided to come onto the show and to share some of the stories and just to talk about as well, what the current situation is like, because I know that you were recently there with visiting the Dalai Lama, just in February, I believe, discussing the current situation and whether he would ever be returning to South Africa or not. But we'll get there. We will get there. I think that what do you think about what I said when I said, Nelson Mandela, Dalai Lama, similar, would you say characters? Would you say traits? Would you say embodiments? Well, what would you say?
I would say that they are cut from the same cloth.
Mm.
They look at the world in very similar ways. They are large people. They have largesse. They are generous and kind. But a very rare, vast kindness that doesn't come around often, and they recognize that in each other. So there's, when you are around Nelson Mandela and when you're around the Dalai Lama, there's definitely a sense of a very large aura, and that's similar. A lot of people have said that there's a similarity in that strength and that presence that they carry.
So you first met His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, when you were how old?
23.
23. So you were traveling the world, and you landed up in India, and you went to one of these retreats, and you decided that you were going to meet the Dalai Lama. Am I right? I mean, where does it 23? Because it was just a year or two after that you actually got to meet His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. So where did that come from? 23 years old, you're in India, and you have this dream or you have this burning desire. From where and why?
Well, I've always aspired to a life of balance and one that one's living in a certain true way to one's path, and so I was fortunate to travel a lot throughout my young life, and I would gravitate towards big souls or people who were living this kind of way, and often they live in very beautiful parts of the world. So I went up to Dharamsala in northern India. I was traveling in India, and I was very touched by the Tibetan people and their way, and I was deeply moved in a very genuine way by the situation under Chinese occupation. So I found myself in the exiled capital in the Himalayas in northern India. It's called Dharamsala. So I landed onto a Buddhist retreat, introduction to Buddhism. It was one of my interests. And at the end of that retreat, we had an opportunity, with hundreds of other Westerners that were in town, to go and have a very brief audience. You stand in a line, and you are ushered past the Dalai Lama, and you shake his hand and greet him.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that was a very poignant moment. It was a very powerful moment. I looked into his eyes and I was sort of like dumbstruck. I was okay, this is a seriously big man.
Well, did you just feel that?
Yeah, it's sort of undeniable. His presence is very, very, very strong and very full. And he I greeted him, and he smiled, and I went on my way.
Right.
And leaving the compound where he lives, I thought, okay, he's got to meet Nelson Mandela. He's got then President Mandela. I love getting people together. No, I mean,
23 years old, and you had this dream. He has to meet Nelson Mandela.
Look, the whole situation was a perfect storm, because we had just come out of a long battle with our own oppressive regime, and I had learnt about the Tibetan situation. The parallels were too close. It was Nelson Mandela was in a position of great power and influence. South Africa had the moral high ground. I mean, we had just stepped right up to that plate, and it seemed like an obvious segue for me. Very naive, very innocent, had no political experience at all, but that if the two of them would meet, something special could happen. So that's where it all started.
Okay, so you had a very brief audience with His Holiness.
Right.
How easy or difficult was it to organize the next meet?
So what happened next was that I had an inspiration one evening, and wrote a letter to the private secretary of the Dalai Lama, saying I would very much like to come and meet with him to speak about the Dalai Lama coming to South Africa, so that he could meet with Nelson Mandela, and
this in your own personal capacity. You were not representing any organization.
I was not. Yeah, I was a
Guy
young
Lieberman.
little civilian. I didn't even put Lieberman after when I signed off. I just wrote, yours faithfully, Guy. Really, no sense of protocol, no understanding. So, but a couple of weeks later, I heard back from the private office saying, "Come down. Let's
you must
talk."
have been thrilled.
Well, I didn't know what to think at that point, because I suppose they took the letter seriously enough to invite me in, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of big ideas about what to do with the Dalai Lama. So they have to vet these, thousands of requests and ideas, and I think they've become quite adept at that. So I went and met with him, and he was even back then he was sort of like an elder secretary. He's retired now. We became quite close over the years. Tenzin Geshe Tetong. And he basically interviewed me. I felt like I was in a big job interview, and he asked me really interesting questions, really interesting angles on who I was and where I came from and what I thought and what I was doing and why South Africa and why the Dalai Lama. And then what happened is he sent me on a sort of like a series of missions, if I could look at it that way.
Like what, for example?
First thing he said is a request has come from Sir Lawrence van der Post, or there has been a request from Sir Lawrence van der Post to bring the Dalai Lama to South Africa. Go explore, see if you can collaborate. So I went, and back then I didn't have internet. It was 94, so I was faxing and calling, and Sir Lawrence van der Post had died recently. So I went back and said, well, he died, so I guess you're stuck with me. I wasn't the only one, the only South African. There's the Tibet Society of South Africa. They have a relationship. But I guess for me, just being there as Nelson Mandela had stepped into the presidency was a great kicker and a big challenge. And so then I was sent out to go and meet with different people in the Central Tibetan administration who's had Africa as their mandate. So I went and met with different people and sort of pitched it, and I got interviewed several times to see if I was not a crazy. And eventually, it was about 6 months of back and forth. I sat down with the private secretary, and he said, "Okay, what have you come back with?" And I updated him, and he said, "So what's your plan?" And I said, "Look." The funny thing is that this was the first time I'd actually heard my plan myself.
Plan? Was there a plan?
I didn't know what my plan was until I actually said it. I said, I'm going to go back to South Africa and start a little Tibet support group in Johannesburg, and I'm going to finance it by having a small charitable organization with Tibetan handicraft, which I'll bring from here, and I'm going to make some noise about Tibet and about the situation there, and then we're going to try and create enough awareness so that South Africans can wake up to the situation inside Tibet. And it was a bit more detailed and longer than that. And he listened and he said, okay, good. Now this is 6 months down the line, long conversations. He said, you're going to meet with His Holiness. You're going to tell him everything you just told me, and then invite him yourself.
Fabulous. So, what was that first experience like?
It was great. I mean,
how would you? I mean, when you just before you met him, I mean, because you'd met him very briefly, but now you were having an audience where you would be interacting and talking, and how were you feeling? Did you start to doubt yourself? Did you think maybe it's not such a good idea, or how am I going to sound confident enough, or how are you feeling?
I think I just relied heavily on the fact that he was a Buddha of compassion. I was, I guess, maybe I was probably feeling quite overwhelmed. I remember going there in Tibetan dress. I don't know why he thought that would have been a good thing to do, but I went in full Tibetan regalia, I suppose as an expression of my respect for the culture. I don't know what my thinking was. Ever since then, they've asked me to please wear a suit. But what was interesting is that he's very comfortable and very humorous, and now you'll understand. I was a hippie basically. I had long hair, and I'd sort of tried to neaten up, and I looked strange. I put coconut oil in my hair to try and pull it back and just get some semblance of dignity. And the first thing he said to me, he stands up and he holds out his hand and he slaps my hand and sort of pulls me close, and he says, "What hairstyle is that?" Did he? It totally sort of set the tone for the conversation. He was very,
fabulous,
very personable, So that was the beginning of the conversation.
Now, Guy, we're not going to go into all the details because unfortunately we just don't have the time. But you have what I found a fantastic story when you asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama to sign something for you, and he did. But there was a much greater gift in that signing, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Perhaps you can just quickly relay that story.
Okay. Well, basically, I asked him to sign a painting of Chenrezig, who's the 1,000-armed Buddha of compassion, and he's the embodiment of Chenrezig. Looking back, I think it was a really corny thing to do, quite honestly. So he signed it, and it was obviously in Tibetan. And I thanked him, and when we parted ways, I said goodbye, and I left his chambers and headed excitedly to the dialectic school, the director of the dialectic school, which is a school of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, and the study to become a geshe. They're very advanced, 12 years to study Tibetan philosophy, and
right.
So they had a lot of knowledge, and I thought they'll translate for me. I know him. It's on the way out. He couldn't read it. He couldn't read the script. He said at the top it said friend Guy Lieberman, and then there was a Dalai Lama signature at the bottom. But that script, he said, was a very old script from somewhere in Tibet, and he couldn't read it. And I thought, well, how can that be? You're the director of the dialectic school. Surely you have some broad.
Right, of course.
And he couldn't read it, and so I went around to other older lamas that I had met, and I had this sort of like challenge. What does it say?
Right.
No one could read it in Dharamsala. It was really, I thought this is a trick, and I was kind of gave up on it, and then I continued on my travels, and I went to Ladakh, which is Indochina. It's the culture there is Ladakhi. It's very close to Tibetan. It is Tibetan basically, and there's this. I was staying at a guest house, and my host was an academic, and I asked him if he might know what this says, and he looked at it and he says, I don't know, but my father, who's a linguist and he's quite old, he's from that part of Tibet. Maybe we can find out. So he went in and he gave the paper to the painting, and he came back and he said, well, yes, he could read it, and it says, friend Guy Lieberman, what you want to do in this life, you can do.
And what crossed your mind? All of a sudden that meaning came through.
Yeah, I guess it felt a little bit like a riddle, I suppose, not that he was setting me up for a riddle, but I got it, and I suppose it was an inspiration.
He knew that if you had gone to all the trouble to have it translated, because he knew just how much trouble you would have to go to have it translated, then it says a lot about your personality, your tenacity, your drive, your ability to achieve what you set your mind out to do, and you passed the test. I find that so illuminating. It's a great story. It's a great story. If you have just tuned in, welcome. It's Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini, and we're listening to stories about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I have Guy Lieberman in the studio. Guy is a social activist, amongst many other things, and he's sharing some of his personal stories with the Dalai Lama, and he's also going to be telling some stories that he heard from the Dalai Lama when the Dalai Lama met former President Nelson Mandela. And of course, Conversations with Niki is sponsored by Study Apps, and Study Apps makes studying a whole lot easier because studies in fact have shown that students retain 50% more of the information they've learned if they take practice tests while learning. So it's all about testing, and that's what Study Apps is all about. It's interactive and it's stimulating. It's about studying smarter, not necessarily harder. So why don't you go along to their website and find out a little bit more. That is studyapps.co.za, and Study Apps, one word, apps, APPS. So Guy, as I said, long story, but eventually you were trying to organize for the Dalai Lama to come to South Africa. You were part of this, delegation of organizing it all. If we had to go back to 1996, was there as much pressure on South Africa by China not to allow His Holiness into this country?
There was definitely pressure, but if you remember at that time, we had we were moving away from Taiwan to China, so there was a representative body, but we didn't have diplomatic ties with China just yet, or it was in process. But there was at that stage I was lobbying in the Department of Home Affairs, and there was a lot of pressure that I'd been told about that was being brought to bear on the departments from China to not let the Dalai Lama into the country. But at that point, under Nelson Mandela's leadership, he was the kind of leader that was able to manage disparate sort of entities, and he could have friends from different spectrums, and that's a rare thing. So in his view, he was like, the Dalai Lama is a spiritual leader. I have great respect for him. We've just come out of our own political struggle. He's coming in. No one's going to tell us again now what to do. And so he was allowed in. He was allowed in 3 times. So that's it shows. And what's interesting is that even when throughout the time that there was pressure through every visit, but the Chinese, with all the threats that would interfere with economic ties, never did anything. Because I guess they need South Africa and Africa as much as...
But don't they put pressure on all countries that invite His Holiness the Dalai Lama into their country?
They do. And the Dalai Lama has a very full travel schedule.
So after his visit in 1996, you've written an article on sitting at the airport in one of the VIP lounges and having kind of a debriefing with the Dalai Lama and asking him about his meeting with former President Nelson Mandela. I mean, I just started off saying, I wonder what they spoke about. I mean, what do two leaders of that magnitude and that insight talk about? So is it about the birds? Is it about the blue sky? Or is it far, far more intense? You asked the Dalai Lama, what was his response?
This was a debrief at the end of the first visit, and he said, I asked him, what was your experience meeting with President Mandela? And he was silent for a bit, and he said, look, he meets with, he has through his life met with great leaders, kings and presidents.
The Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama had
Yes.
met with some of the world's greatest leaders and scientists and activists and fellow social Nobel Peace Laureates, some of the biggest people in the world. And what he would do is he would prepare to meet with them by looking at their reputation, by studying who they were and what they were about. And he said that in most cases, pretty much every case, the reputation of the individual was always much larger than the person, much larger. But then he said, he was reflecting that when he was preparing to meet with Nelson Mandela, now Nelson Mandela's reputation was the way he put it, the biggest reputation in the world, which you can say is a fact. And he said in only this case was his person, the individual, much bigger than the reputation.
And that was his description of their meeting. Did they discuss Tibet? Do you know? Did they discuss the situation with China?
The meeting was private, just between the two of them, which is appropriate. And I'm sure they did. He would not have let that opportunity go by. But of course, they could have also just sat there in silence. Who knows?
Wasn't there a passing of their autobiographies, and weren't you a part of that as well?
Well, back then, because I was a kid, really, and I had no political sway or any influence or any strategies or understanding, I would just work creatively with what I had. And so I wanted to form this connection between them. I exchanged. I had the Dalai Lama sign his autobiography for Nelson Mandela, and then Nelson Mandela signed his autobiography for Dalai Lama, and I exchanged the books between them.
And did the Dalai Lama comment on the book? Not really.
No.
He's probably still reading it.
It is a long walk.
It is indeed a long walk. After that visit in '96, what did you think to yourself? Did you think, wow, it happened? Okay, so this is something when I was 23 years old and I first met His Holiness, and I thought, he has to meet Nelson Mandela. Now it happened. So what was going through your mind? I mean, did you think, okay, that little tick, dream fulfilled, okay, let's move on?
Well, look, it was an accomplishment. It was, please understand, I was part of a much bigger machine. This is not, was not my doing.
Own, right.
No. But I was very happy that it happened, and but it was actually the beginning. Now it was not the end. This is the beginning of trying to forge a relationship between South Africa and South Africans, and Tibet and the Tibetan situation under Chinese rule.
So you saw this as the beginning of something that could bring about a lot of positive change.
Sure. Once he was here and people got a sense as to who he was and what the situation was there. It's a brutal oppression that continues today. That there would be more of an upswelling, and there was a far greater movement that was formed out of that because of his presence, because he came.
We are going to take a break, and then we're going to continue with some stories, because of those, of course, I'd allude to those as being the golden years when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was allowed onto South African shores, because of course things have changed over the past few years, which we're going to get to. We will continue with that conversation in a while. So let us take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps, and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Well, if you have just tuned in, welcome. Niki Seberini here. It's Conversations with Niki. It's another interesting conversation. And I would like to welcome our syndication partner listeners, 90.3 MC FM, that's in Plet, Neisner FM, Wild Coast FM in East London, Bay FM in PN, and our brand new partner, Guy FM. As I said, it's great to have you on board. And just a reminder that if you do miss part of the show, each and every show is podcast. I encourage you to visit the website www.conversationswithniki, and that is one word, and Niki is spelled Niki.co.za. All the podcasts are there. And also I'm encouraging you to write in, give me some feedback, tell me what you think of the shows so far. If you want more of a particular topic, if you perhaps have a story that you would like to share, I'd love to hear from you. So go along to the website and just go to the Contact Me page, put those details, and incidentally, the first 10 people that do that are going to win a copy of David Bullard's book, Screw It, Let's Do Lunch. So let me just congratulate those people who did it last week, and that's Nikki Kaminer, Josh Donaldson, Lungi Motseta, Pat Freeman, Vaneshri, there was no surname there, Vanna Ferreira, Alice Ferguson, and B. Mungwe. Congratulations to you. If you'd like to win a copy of that book, go visit that website, www.conversationswithniki.co.za. So it is a fascinating conversation that we are having. I have Guy Lieberman in the studio, and Guy is a social activist. He does lots of other things as well. But when Guy was 23 years old and he was traveling the world and he went to India, he was lucky enough to have a very quick audience with the Dalai Lama, and that very first encounter sparked a dream, and the dream was to get the Dalai Lama and former President Nelson Mandela together, and he was just a small part of a big engine which worked ferociously to get His Holiness the Dalai Lama to South Africa, which they did do in 1996. And Guy is in the studio sharing these stories and these insights, because we read about it and we have opinions about it, but it's lovely to be able to hear actually what happens behind, not necessarily the closed doors. We'd really love to know what happens behind the closed doors, but just really what people get to, and how hard people have to work to make these things happen. So now we were saying that it was great in 1996, and then the Dalai Lama returned in 1999, and then again in 2004. Right. Did anything evolve each and every time he returned? Were there changes? Was it just a visit? Was there a greater purpose?
Yeah, look, he formed relationships every time he would come, and the connections would be made, and so there would be sort of like people who would come back, or he would interact with them again. Really interesting stuff that didn't come up through the media. His experience with a family in Soweto, and ending up supporting that child through tertiary education. Which
how did he come across his family in Soweto?
We had just met with Walter Sisulu. That was 96.
Yes.
And he asked the entourage, the VIP state security, hate this kind of stuff, if he could just meet some people that don't necessarily know who he is. And so they found a road in the area in Soweto, and he got out and started walking down the road, and the Home Affairs sort of liaison who was with the entourage and myself approached a few homes and asked if they would accept a guest to come and meet them. And a family welcomed him in. They had no idea who he was. It was a perfect scenario for him, and he could have a real conversation with people that didn't have necessarily a political agenda or didn't see him as this great holy man, just this interesting person in burgundy robes. And one of the things that happened was this child was there, and he was speaking with the family, and he noticed the child, and that sort of meeting closed. And then in 2004 we were back in Soweto at the university there, and he asked if he could go back and see their family. This before we arrived. He wanted to prepare for that, and they did. And there was the child, now 16 or 17, and the Dalai Lama opened up a conversation with him and said, what are you up to? What are you doing? He says, I'm just finishing school. I'd like to study, but I'm going to probably try and find a job because we don't have money. And he said, I'll put you through tertiary education. I'll put you through university. Just quietly, he said, I'll fund it. And it was, the family was just
Can you
shock.
imagine? Do you know what he went and studied?
I think it was finance or business. I think
Have you tracked him?
Yeah, we check in every now and then. I think he studied at Cedar University. Yeah, that was one of the sort of suggested schools for a kid like this young man. And he had a job at a bank. He's now looking for activity in the NGO sector. He's an interesting guy.
And you just really impact on one person, you impact on the family, you impact on, it's just a ripple effect. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So 2004, when he was last here, were there more rumblings because trade between South Africa and China was growing, a lot more trade happening there. Were you feeling the pressure from the South African government in the 2004 visit?
Certainly. We felt it every time. Even if I just back up to 99, we had a meeting set up with President Mbeki, with the Dalai Lama, and then we got a call saying the meeting's not going to happen. So that it was off. It was called. This was a couple of days before. But what was interesting is that
any reason why?
No reason given.
Okay.
Yeah, schedules probably. But the media picked up on this and they went crazy, and Tutu slammed Mbeki, and it was funny because Tutu said it's not so much the political sort of issue. It's more about that you're missing an opportunity to meet this holy man. He was like almost concerned for what a missed opportunity. So that was interesting, and there was no real reason given, and we had to deal with it. But what it did do is it created a lot of energy. In the same way that every time he comes, there's a lot of focus, just the visa application, and there's enough front page press because it's a major issue. It uncovers what's actually happening behind closed doors. And what's interesting is that if the Dalai Lama's whole purpose in life is to kind of bring truth to a situation or to a scenario, he's doing it, really. He's not even here. But what's happening is that through this situation, we realize how owned we are by China.
Uh-huh. You've said, in one of your articles, you said, outside of China, there's little doubt that the Dalai Lama is the epitome of integrity, humility, leadership, and kindness. And you were, I said at the beginning, you fought your fights along the way. I mean, you have been outspoken at times. And it was, I think, in 1999 that there was an article written by Trevor Manuel about the Dalai Lama, trying to justify why he shouldn't be allowed to come to South Africa. And you responded. It was quite a strong response. Just taking some excerpts from the article, Trevor Manuel said the reason why the Dalai Lama wants to be here is to make a big global political statement about the succession of Tibet from China, and he wants to make it on the free soil of South Africa. I'm sure he's welcome to come at any other time, but we shouldn't allow him to raise global issues that will impact on the standing of South Africa. And I'm going to read again what you've said, how you describe him, the epitome of integrity, humility, leadership, and kindness. And yet it creates this turmoil. Governments are responding in a way. So I'd like you to talk just very briefly about how you responded to his letter and how His Holiness responds to this kind of a response within a government.
Well, look, I think what really got my backup, but also a lot of the people, a lot of South Africans, is just the blatant hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Listen to what he said. This is he was a freedom activist. They went around the world campaigning for South African freedom, you know. So it's just the irony and the hypocrisy is just off the charts. And so I had to push back and also say, you know, even though the Dalai Lama doesn't come with an agenda to free Tibet, you know, I mean, his own political position is nuanced and something that China should actually grab up while they can, because after him it's gonna get much more complicated. But we have no right, really, to, you know, this is the free South African soil. He said it. You know, we are allowed to. So if it was free South African soil, let him come and speak. But it's not free because obviously there's an overlord, and we have to acknowledge that. And he was just speaking to the overlord.
So how does His Holiness respond to something like this? He is a man he's about compassion and peace. And so when he sees that a potential visit could create this outburst and this debate within a country, especially a country like South Africa, does he just simply want to walk away from that?
Not that he simply wants to walk away. I'll tell you a little story, but basically the context is that he does not want to cause embarrassment anywhere he goes. If it's really uncomfortable, it's fine. He won't come. There's a certain kind of humility, a very rare humility that a leader of that stature has, and he has it in bucket loads. He really is. He basically says, look, I would love to come. I love South Africa. I have my friends there, and Tutu, and you know, all the, you know, there's a lot that he sees here, but he doesn't want to cause any kind of uproar in his name. So there's an interesting story. I'd just come back in '95, and I had started my political lobbying 101, and I had an opportunity that I remember. I thought this was just going to roll on, that this was probably the best opportunity I'd ever had to present the Tibetan cause to the South African government. A certain Deputy Director General of Foreign Affairs was a strong supporter of the Tibetan cause. She was in exile herself. She was a big activist, and she invited me to present to her full staff. There were about 20 people in her office, and I showed a film and we spoke about it, and she got really agitated, really upset, and she recounted to me that the Chinese had stormed into her office and demanded that she stop the Dalai Lama's visit. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that's exactly, they will do that. That's what they'll, you know, that's, you know, it is kind of it's quite forceful the way they do this. And she was like, well, they can't do that, and she got really sort of upset. And I thought, this is great. This is a feather in my cap, okay? And you know, so I traveled back to Dharamsala, and I had an audience with the Dalai Lama, and I said to him, you know, I was telling him about what I've been doing. I was sort of like reporting back in a sense, and he listened to my account of this exchange with the Deputy Director General, and I explained it all, and I was quite honestly, I was excited. You know, this is like, you know, we're on the way.
Support. Mm.
And he listened to me, and I finished, and he looks at me and he said, "No use making people angry. No use."
That was his response.
Yeah. Mm. It's like he right through to the
no
core.
Use making people angry.
Yeah.
Mm. Guy, you were there in February.
Yes.
So this is twice that he's been invited. He has not been given a visa, or it's just taken a long time. And I know that you asked him, do you want to come back to South Africa?
And
tell us about that discussion.
So he wants to come. He wants to come back to South Africa on the same grounds, if it's convenient, in his words. But because there are invitations that are open from 2009, 2011. That these hosts would still like to have the Dalai Lama come, and he said yes, he would love to come, you know, as long as people don't get too angry.
He also spoke about the relationship that South Africa has with China.
Yeah, that was interesting, because the funny thing is coming from his view, which is a very large, broad view, and imbued with compassion, he doesn't see China as a force to be pushed back. He says that we should engage China, the world should engage China. So there are a lot of activists that are anti-China or pro-Tibet, and he's not on that path. He says, no, engage them, bring them into the family of nations, and work with them. So I asked him, what is it? Why is South Africa doing this? Why is Africa doing it? Because it stands. Kenya. He also couldn't go to Kenya. So I said, what is it about South Africa that's missing here? And he said this very kindly. It was not a criticism, and you can feel it when he says it. He said, Africa lacks a certain confidence in itself, and he sees a great relationship that should result between China and Africa. He says the Chinese people are incredibly hardworking, and Africans can learn from that. But Africa needs to stand up in its dignity and grace and be able to say, we are the captains of our destiny, and we don't need another colonial force in the guise of business or whatever. We need to be able to stand up with that sort of like centeredness and strong feeling of identity. And he gets it. And I remember I went to visit him with the mayor of Cape Town in 1999, Norma Indian Feketo. She's now Deputy Speaker of Parliament. And the first thing he said, we came in, before we had sat down, how is African confidence?
Guy, do you think he'll be returning soon?
I hope so. I do hope so. I hope that we come around. There was an interesting moment in the last in 2004. The Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela just walked out of their meeting in Madiba's office at his foundation, and I went to thank Madiba, and the entourage had left, and I turned around to leave, and I saw that the Dalai Lama had stood back, and I was sort of like shocked because it was the three of us in the room. So I sort of stepped back just to observe this extraordinary moment of the two men alone in the room. Mm-hmm. And they were just smiling at each other in farewell. And I thought to myself, yes. I said, this is probably the last time that these two will see each other in this life. And as I thought it, the Dalai Lama picks up his hand and he says, see you again. I'll see you again. And I was like, what do I know?
Gee whiz. Guy, thank you so much for coming in and for sharing those stories and giving us some insights. And, even though this happened last year, or it was 2009 as well, I think we as South Africans need to make up our mind where we stand. We have to pick a lane. I think it's what we have to do. So thanks, Guy. It's been fantastic. Guy Lieberman. And incidentally, Guy is going to be speaking about his experiences with the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan community, both in exile and inside Tibet, at the Limud conference in Joburg. It's happening this Sunday, which is the 11th of August. So for more info on the conference, you can go to www.limud.org.za. Guy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, of course, it is August, and August is Women's Month. And they're just wonderful people who do fantastic things within our community. So we have decided to focus on some women who are doing fantastic things. And I wonder if, while you're listening right now, if ever you think to yourself, I want to do more, I want to give more, but how? What do? I don't necessarily have all the time in the world, or, I have to pay bonds and I have to pay my expenses, and realistically speaking, I need to work, and well, if I'm working, it takes up all my time. How can I dedicate some of my time, and how can I give back? So what we're going to be doing on Conversations with Niki is every now and then bringing people onto the show just to perhaps inspire you, and perhaps through their shared experience and shared story, you may get an idea of what you can do, or just be inspired by their stories. So I say for our next guest, and as I said, because it is Women's Month, we're going to be focusing on women. I'd like to welcome Emma O'Brien, who is a photographer, but who is doing fabulous things. So, Emma, welcome to the studio. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you.
But you're from the UK.
I am.
So what brought you to South Africa?
A man brought me here.
A man, oh darling. Nothing like a man.
Nothing like a man. Yes, I came here with a boyfriend nearly 4 years ago now. He's since been traded in, so. Okay. But, it's kind of...
But South Africa stayed.
South Africa stayed. I love it here.
What is it about South Africa that you like?
I just think, there's an amazing energy in this country. As somebody who's quite passionate about making a difference with what I do as a photographer, it's a wonderful place to be because there's such an opportunity to do good here. I think, as you probably know, I do an awful lot of charity work for Santon SPCA and CLAW, and actually there's huge scope here for doing that. So
you studied photography in the UK?
I did.
Now, when you were studying, did you see yourself as a fashion photographer, working on shoots? So where did this desire to help and this philanthropic nature, where did that come from?
It's kind of why I started photography. I was always quite inspired by the work of the Magnum photographers who were out doing kind of stuff in war zones and taking photos of things that perhaps other people ignore, and bringing them to the fore and making people aware of what's going on in the world. So for me, that was why I became a photographer. But obviously, one can't graduate from college and go, hey, I'm going to be a documentary photographer. It's not possible. So I started my own business doing wedding photography, and I guess all the kind of philanthropic stuff kind of went on the back burner until I moved here, and then it was kind of the opportunity to hit the ground running with it. So
how come you think there's more opportunity in South Africa to do that kind of work?
I guess if you went looking for it in the UK, you would find it, but I think we have the schooling system and everything in the UK is so good. I think there's not much excuse to be begging on the street corner there, really. Whereas I think here, there's a huge gap between rich and poor. And I think, there's a lot of scope to make a difference for people who need it.
So I asked the question, for people who are listening right now, who would like to do something, who have this philanthropic nature or this burning desire to do something else.
Yep.
How do you find the balance? You said you finished studying, so you did the job that paid the bills.
Yep.
How do you do it in South Africa?
It's kind of, I don't know that I have much balance, to be honest. I kind of work 7 days a week, so I have my stuff that pays the bills. So I do lots of baby photography and family portraits. And I guess during the week is a bit of time to go and do my charity work. It's so important to me. It's just factored into my life. It's not, you just make time for it. I think it's a case of prioritizing. Most people who know me will know my time management is terrible. So.
But as you say, it's who you are.
Yeah.
It's an extension of who you are.
Is.
So when you go to, for example, the Santon SPCA and CLAW, and you're taking these pictures, are you just taking pictures of animals so that people will then buy them? Or are you taking, what kind of pictures are you taking?
So for CLAW, for example, I'll go to the CLAW clinic and photograph the dogs they've got there that are in need of new homes. It tends to help enormously having good photos of them to put on the Facebook page. So people kind of have a look and go, oh, I like the look of that dog. The professional photos make a huge difference as compared to kind of little snapshots. Santon SPCA, I've photographed their fundraising calendars for the last 3 years. So actually they featured dogs that had already been adopted. So we kind of had a happy ending kind of calendar, which, is people buy into that much more. So it's... so
you're not really exposing the nasty, ugly, awful picture that's a real reality of animals out there in South Africa.
It can be, but I think actually, people are so tired of looking at those images. I've gone out both with CLAW and with Santon SPCA. They do mobile clinics in townships. And I've taken lots of pictures, and I think there's a general misconception that people living there don't look after their animals or shouldn't have animals, or if, like Jacob Zuma said, that dogs are just for white people. Actually, and I've ended up taking a lot of photos of these township folk who love their dogs, and you kind of capture this relationship they have with their dogs. And I think in being able to use those images for fundraising, it's much better. People give when there's hope rather than when there's no hope.
Aren't you taking it to the next level and climbing a certain mountain to raise funds?
I certainly am, in like 3 weeks' time.
Kilimanjaro.
Kilimanjaro.
You're doing that to raise funds for?
Santon SPCA.
Okay.
I managed to persuade the committee that they needed an official photographer to document the trip, so...
So you're going along.
I'm going along.
So have you been training? Are
Yes.
you in training?
Yes.
And what is training?
Training's running up and down hills in Parkmore currently, and trying not to die.
And how do you feel? When did you say? In a couple of weeks?
3 weeks' time.
How are you feeling about it?
As the closer it gets, the more I'm kind of questioning what sort of, how good an idea this was. As somebody who is not a big fan of camping or hiking, it's going to be a challenge.
Okay, but it's for the greater good,
It's for
as
the
you
greater
say.
good,
The
absolutely,
greater good.
absolutely.
We're going to take a break in just a moment, and then when we come back, let's talk, Emma, about your trip to Africa and taking pictures and why you went to Africa to take these pictures. Here for you on Conversations with Niki.
Hi, my name is Esvia Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. And of course, Conversations with Niki is sponsored by Study Apps, because statistics show that if students don't review what they've learned, they're going to forget 70% within an hour and 84% within 48 hours. So if you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, if you are learning currently, why don't you go along to studyapps.co.za and learn more. And if you have just tuned in, great to be with you. Niki Seberini here. Conversations with Niki. And I have in the studio Emma O'Brien, who really walks her talk, because sometimes we talk about the things that we want to do or the things that we're passionate about, and we complain about certain things around us, but when do we actually do things? You know, when you see the rubbish on the road, do you ever put on some rubber gloves and take a packet and clean it up, or are you just going to whinge and moan? And if you see, for example, the SPCA looking after animals and you'd like to help, do you just think about it, or are you doing it? And I suppose that taking action it takes effort, it takes time, and I think it takes planning as well. So as I said on Conversations with Niki, we're going to be bringing you people who do these sort of things, and hopefully you're going to be inspired. So Emma, you're a photographer living in South Africa.
Yep.
And supporting these animal organizations, going to climb Kilimanjaro,
Yep.
but you also went up to Africa you went to the Congo and you went to
I did.
Rwanda.
I did.
And that for you, I mean, what will you tell me? What was that experience like?
It was a kind of, I say it's a bit of a cliche to say it was life-changing, but it was an incredibly humbling experience. We spent 2 weeks in March this year and a week in August last year in Goma and Bukavu in the DRC, meeting and photographing Congolese people who are living there in the midst of a civil war. I mean, the place is so unstable. It's in constant flux with the military coming in and out, and it was interesting to go and meet these people who are living in the midst of that, and yet they're creating their own inspirational community projects, and it was magical, really, when you think there's people here there were lots of women we met who've not been educated, they can't write their own names, yet they're supporting kids whose parents have died, and they're setting up little farming cooperatives so they can send these kids to school. I mean, it was absolutely amazing.
I can imagine that was life-changing.
Yeah.
So what was the purpose? It was all about the Faces of Courage?
So
album?
I'm planning to put a book together which will be called Faces of Courage. So it's a series of portraits of ordinary Congolese people living in extraordinary circumstances. And it did start off as a project where I just wanted to go and photograph and meet women who'd been victims of sexual violence there. And actually, of course, as these things do, it sort of grew, and we met other community groups. So the plan is to collate these portraits into a book and use the proceeds from the book to raise funds for the 2 charities there that we spent time with. And they have like sewing programs for women and business empowerment programs for women there, as well as educational programs to send kids to school, because that's a huge problem there. It only costs $50 a year to send a child to school in Congo, yet most of these children aren't going to school.
Are not being educated.
Yeah.
When you go and you face that and you see it firsthand, you're not just reading about it or hearing about it. How does it impact on you while you're there?
I think while you're there, it's a place where you're sort of on edge the whole time. So it's a bit of a sort of adrenaline rush for the whole time, because it is unstable. And I think it's when we got back and I sat going through the photos and I looked at them again for the first time since I photographed them, and everything comes back to you, and it sits with you. It's emotionally, it sits with you. Because you think, especially as you hear reports that it's all everything's kicked off there again, and you start to think about the people you've met and you photographed and how are they, and
it's easy to forget when you come back, because when you're there, I'm sure you have all these inspired ideas, and then you get back to normal life. So what would you say to people who are listening, who want to do something but just can't get there?
You just have to motivate yourself to go and do it. Make the phone call to the charity you want to go and volunteer for. Send the email to the organisation that you want to go and help. I mean, that's how my Congo project started, was with an email to them saying, can I come and take photos for you? Invariably, people are usually pretty receptive when you want to help.
Just do it, is what you're saying.
Just do it.
Just do it. Emma, all the best climbing Mount Kilimanjaro.
Thank you.
Let us know how it goes. Hope you raise lots and lots of money.
Thank you very
much.
much.
And for the great work that you're doing, and for sharing it with the listeners and hopefully inspiring them.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. I hope that you have enjoyed the show. I have so enjoyed being with you. I have so enjoyed having interesting discussions with our guests today, and I'm looking very forward to being with you again next week. Please remember, go to the website. You could win a book. Give some feedback, stories, insights, www.conversationswithniki.co.za. Until next week. Goodbye. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.